In 2010, when I was around 12 years old, my family went on a trip to Lakeview, Colorado. We were joined by some of my cousins and family friends, which made it even more exciting. At the resort, my cousins and I loved spending time at the kids' club. It was like a little paradise for us kids. There were always games to play, like board games, crafts, and group activities, which kept us busy all day. Now, there was a director at the kids' club who was in charge of watching us and running all the activities. His name was Greg. He was about 40 years old, very tall and skinny, and had a lot of hair missing on his head. Looking back, I'm amazed at how unaware and clueless I was about danger as a kid. I'm sure most kids were the same, but it's still shocking to think about. If I met this guy now, I wouldn't even want to stand within 5 feet of him. But at 12 years old, I thought he was great, like he was just some fun adult who ran all the activities. It's funny how much time and experience can change the way you see things. Anyway, back then, it didn't cross my mind that there was anything off about him. We were all told that, for some reason, Greg was going to leave the hotel in a week. No one explained why, and I didn't really care or think too much about it at the time. It just felt like a small, unimportant detail to me. On our last day at the hotel, I lost my cell phone. It was a bright blue chocolate phone, the kind with the spinning wheel, if anyone remembers those. I told my parents right away that I couldn't find it. Since this was already the second phone I had lost that year, my mom got really mad. She told me that if I didn't find it, I would be grounded. So, I ran all over the hotel trying to find my phone. I even went to the kids' club to see if anyone had found it. Usually, the kids' club was full of kids playing games and having fun, but this time, it was strangely quiet and empty. Greg was the only one there, sitting alone on a couch. I walked up to him and asked, "Hey Greg, have you seen my phone by any chance?" Greg looked at me and said, "Oh, so it's your phone." "Yes, I found it and put it in the lost and found in the basement. It's a bit out of the way, but come with me, and I'll show you where it is." At that moment, I didn't really think about anything else. I just wanted my phone back. Not thinking anything was wrong, I just followed Greg without question as he led me to the back of the hotel. We walked for about 3 minutes until we reached the bottom of a staircase that led down to the basement. We were standing at the back of the hotel in an area where no one else was around. The walls were plain, unpainted concrete, and it looked more like a storage area than a place where you'd keep a lost and found. It was dark and gave me an uneasy feeling. Greg nodded and held the door open, waving for me to go down the stairs. For a moment, I was about to step forward, but then something inside me suddenly woke up. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was fear, or maybe I just got lucky, but I felt deep down that something wasn't right. Before Greg could say or do anything, I shouted, "Never mind." I think I left it with my mom, and ran away from the stairs back to the hotel lobby. I was really scared because something about that situation felt very wrong. As a kid who always saw the good in people and trusted everyone, this feeling was a big deal for me. I tried to calm myself down and decided I needed to look into it a bit more. So, I went up to the hotel concierge and asked where the lost and found was. The nice lady at the front desk told me the lost and found was right there at her desk. She then asked me what kind of phone I lost, and when I told her it was a blue chocolate flip phone, she smiled even more and pulled it out of a box under her desk. "Someone turned it in here earlier," she said, handing the phone to me. "Wait, are you saying the lost and found isn't in the basement?" I asked. She looked at me kindly and said, "No, sweetie. The basement is actually under construction right now. They're just rebuilding it." Hearing that, my stomach dropped. Everything that had just happened with Greg started to make sense, and I realized how close I might have come to real danger. At that time, I was sharing a hotel room with my cousin, and she was the only person I told about what happened. But since she was only 8 years old, I think I really scared her with my story. Now I'm 26, and I still think back to that moment and wonder what would have happened if I had gone down to the basement with Greg the Animal Man. It feels like it was one of the most important moments in my whole life, and I'm so glad I knew to get out of there before it was too late. My parents got divorced in 2010 when I was around 7 years old. I was old enough to understand that things were changing, but not quite old enough to understand why. Even though they decided to end their marriage, they managed to stay friends, which made it a little easier for me and my siblings. After the divorce, my mom moved out and took us with her to my grandparents' old house. My grandparents had recently moved to a new place, but they were really kind and let us stay in their old house. It wasn't the house I grew up in, but at least we had a safe place to go. Anyway, we ended up living in that house for about 5 years. It was me, my mom, my 2 older sisters, and our dog. I can't remember exactly when all the things I'm going to tell you happened, but I promise every word is true. The house had 3 floors, the ground floor, the basement, and the upper floor where my sisters and I slept. The basement, though, was a different story. It was the most terrifying place in the whole house. I remember my heart racing every time I had to go down there, even if it was just to grab something for my mom. The stairs went from the basement to the first floor, then up to the second floor in a spiral shape. A few times each week, you could hear footsteps slowly coming up from the basement, briefly stopping on the first floor, and then continuing up to the second floor. The footsteps would stop at my older sister's room, but sometimes they would stop outside my room or my other sister's room. We all heard it, and it always gave us chills. My mom didn't like to talk about it, as if ignoring it would make it go away. But my sisters and I couldn't help but talk about it the next day to confirm we weren't imagining things. Our dog never went down to the basement. She hated it just as much as we did. Lots of small, strange things happened down there. The light would turn off by itself, things would move, and we could often hear noises even when no one was there. Then one evening, my sisters and I were playing with walkie-talkies, trying to find the local police channel. It was something kids liked to do in the 2010s. But this time, the voice on the walkie-talkie sounded different, much clearer and closer, almost like it was in the room with us. It said all kinds of weird things to us, but what scared us the most was when it spoke directly to my oldest sister. It said it was going to hurt her and even said her name. We were terrified, so we turned off the walkie-talkie as quickly as we could. Not even a minute later, our dog ran into our room barking like crazy at nothing. She stared at the corner of the room, growling and barking into the empty space. Our dog was big and very protective of us kids, but she had never acted like this before. She kept barking and wouldn't leave our side, as if she was guarding us from something we couldn't see. Another time, it was just me and my mom at home. My sisters and our dog were away. I was playing in my room on the second floor, and my mom was doing her own thing. Suddenly, I heard really loud footsteps coming from the basement. Even though I was all the way up in my room, the sound was so loud it was like someone was running up the stairs from the basement and then up to the second floor. They sounded so heavy, and I knew it couldn't be my mom, as she never walked like that. The footsteps came all the way to just outside my room and then suddenly stopped. Then, out of nowhere, my door slammed shut really hard. It made such a loud noise that I screamed and started crying. I was so scared, I didn't understand what was happening. My mom heard me and ran up the stairs as fast as she could. She tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it was locked from the inside, but I knew that door didn't even have a lock. My mom kept trying to force it open, and I could hear her calling my name, but the door just wouldn't move. My mom shouted for me to stay calm while she ran downstairs to get some tools to break the door open. Then, the door suddenly unlocked by itself and opened. Another time, my sisters and the dog were away, and there was a big storm. For some reason, I was really scared of the thunder that night. I had never been scared of thunder before or after, but that night, I was terrified. At the same time, strange things started happening in the basement. We heard things being thrown around and the sound of glass breaking. The next morning, we found broken glass and things scattered everywhere, just like we had heard. Many other small, strange things happened over the years, but these are the ones that I remember the most clearly. It always seemed worse when our dog wasn't there, like whatever it was knew we felt less protected. We lived in that house from around 2010 to 2015. Even though it was years ago, I still think about it sometimes. The memories are so vivid, and I wonder if there was something about that house that we will never understand. I lived in a pretty big house for about 10 years. The house had a lot of space, and one of the largest parts was the basement. But my dad always told me not to go down there at night. Even during the day, someone always went with me if I had to go. The basement was dark, even with the lights on. My dad was the bravest person I knew, and he never seemed scared of anything, but I noticed that whenever he went down to the basement, he always took our dog, Max, with him. It was around 2012, and I had a friend staying over for a sleepover. My friend came up with a plan for us to go down to the basement, even though my dad had said no one was allowed to go there. We waited until my dad and my sisters fell asleep, and then we started going down to the basement. There were about 12 steps leading down, and when we got to the bottom, the floor was cold and hard. We brought flashlights with us so that if my dad woke up and went to the kitchen, he wouldn't see any lights on in the basement. The basement had about 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, our laundry room, and a big open area right when you entered. My dad always told me not to go into 2 of the rooms down there. When I asked why, he just said it was because there was glass inside. But I decided to ignore that and went into those rooms. My friend and I went into the first bedroom, but it was full of boxes and storage stuff. It was pretty boring for us, so we decided to check out the next room, and that's when things started to get a little strange. As soon as we entered, we heard some weird noises. We thought it might be my dad, so we stopped and waited for the noises to go away. When the noises stopped, we left the room and went to the laundry room, which led to the bathroom if you kept walking straight. I went into the bathroom, and the mirror opened up. I wasn't thinking much about it and just closed it. Then, suddenly, my friend pulled on my shirt and said he thought he heard my dad coming down the stairs. I got ready to get in trouble for breaking the rules and called out, "Dad?" But no one was there. I thought my friend might be playing a trick on me, but then we heard more noises coming from the same second room we had gone into. I went back in to see if it was my dad, but instead, I saw that the door to the heater was open. I went to close the door, but my friend said he had a weird feeling, so he stayed by the door to the room. After I closed the door, I turned around and saw my friend's face turn pale. He was pointing behind me. I turned around and saw a dark figure. We both screamed as loud as we could and ran to the stairs. My friend ran first, and I followed right behind him. We could hear the figure running up the stairs after us. When we got to the top, we slammed the door shut. All the noise woke up my dad, and we told him what had happened. At first, he said he had asked a friend to come over and hide in the basement to see if I would break the rules. But 5 years later, my dad told me the truth, it wasn't his friend after all. He said the house was haunted, but he didn't want to tell me back then because he didn't want to scare me so much that I wouldn't want to live there. When I was in grad school, I worked part-time on weekends for a junk removal company. Our job involved clearing out old furniture, broken appliances, and any other unwanted items people needed to dispose of. Most of our work was in neighborhoods full of families and young professionals living in well-kept homes. Because of this, I rarely felt uneasy or worried about going into strangers' houses. That changed one afternoon when we got a job that felt like the start of a bad horror story. We drove down a long, narrow driveway to the house. Once we parked, my coworker and I began filling out some paperwork. This was the estimate we'd leave with the client after we finished. When we looked up, we noticed the customer standing silently right outside the driver's side window, staring into our truck. We hadn't heard him approach, and he hadn't said a word. The man was around 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and wore glasses. His pale skin and gray hair gave him a slightly ghostly appearance, and he was a little hunched over. He kept his hands behind his back, and when he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost a whisper. While he didn't seem outwardly threatening, the way he just stood there silently felt unsettling, and it made the whole situation seem off. To this day, I can't pinpoint exactly why he felt so strange. Maybe it was his blank expression or the way he never blinked while staring at us. There was just something about him that felt wrong, and stepping into his house only amplified the unease. The house mirrored its owner's unsettling vibe. It was dimly lit, eerily quiet, and had an unwelcoming feel. It was obvious he lived there alone. Everything in the house, the furniture, decor, and fixtures, looked as though it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. He mentioned in passing that he had inherited the house from his mother. The eeriest part, though, was the empty indoor pool in the center of the house. To make matters worse, the item he wanted us to remove was tucked away in a far corner of the basement. We explained how to book an appointment if he decided to go through with the job, handed him the estimate, and left the basement as quickly as we could. Once we got back to the truck, I turned to my coworker and immediately said I wouldn't return to that house if the man booked the job. My coworker agreed, which made me feel slightly relieved. It wasn't just me imagining things. He also thought the man was deeply unsettling and admitted he'd felt uneasy the entire time we were there. We decided to call our boss and inform him about the situation. We didn't want anyone else feeling the same unnerving vibe we had. It was the way the man stared, the way he stood so quietly, and the absolute silence of the house that made it so disturbing. There was just an overwhelming sense that something wasn't right, and we both felt it. Even though nothing explicitly happened, I believe if I were older and more cautious, I wouldn't have followed him into his house. I think we all have an instinct to protect ourselves, and that day, I should have trusted mine a little more. On August 6th, I was in my mom's basement doing laundry. My boyfriend, who was out of town for work, and I were on FaceTime to stay connected. I had set my phone up on a bottle of laundry detergent so he could see me while I sorted through the pile of clothes. The basement had always been a bit eerie, but I was used to it. The dim, buzzing light barely illuminated the corners, and the old pipes occasionally groaned, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. As I was bending down to pick up a shirt, my boyfriend suddenly said, "Wait. Move out of the way." Confused, I straightened up and turned toward my phone. "What? Why?" I asked, looking behind me. "There's something back there," he said, his voice low but tense. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced over my shoulder. I didn't see anything unusual, just the shadowy outline of the old shelves my mom used for storage. "You're messing with me, aren't you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, but my hands were trembling. "I'm not." "Just move for a second," he insisted. Feeling uneasy, I stepped to the side. He quickly took a screenshot of what he was seeing. "Go upstairs," he said after a pause. "I'll show you the picture once you're out of there." I didn't argue. Something in his tone told me he wasn't joking. I grabbed the laundry basket and hurried up the creaky stairs, feeling like I was being watched the whole way. As soon as I reached the safety of the living room, he sent me the screenshot. When I opened the image, my heart dropped. There, in the background, near the corner of the room, was what looked like a face peering out from behind the shelves. It wasn't clear, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. "What is that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I don't know," he said. "But I didn't edit it, I swear." I believed him. He couldn't have done that in just a few minutes anyway. But that didn't make me feel any better. I couldn't stop staring at the image, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or my overactive imagination. Over the next few days, I tried to push the incident out of my mind. But something about it lingered, like a shadow that refused to leave. Then, a few nights later, I was at my boyfriend's house. We were both feeling under the weather, so I decided to stay there for a while to rest. I fell asleep easily enough, but when I woke up, I had this overwhelming sense of unease. The room was dark and quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. I sat up and looked around, but everything seemed normal. "It's nothing," I told myself, though my heartbeat was racing. When I mentioned it to my boyfriend, he shrugged it off, saying I was probably just imagining things. He had to leave for work soon after, so he dropped me off at my mom's house. That night, I was lying in bed talking to my little sister. I tried to focus on our conversation, but my mind kept drifting back to that screenshot. I couldn't stop replaying the moment in the basement, wondering what my boyfriend had really seen. Then, as I happened to glance up at the ceiling, I froze. There was a cross there, a simple one made of two intersecting beams. At first, I didn't think much of it. But the more I stared, the more I realized something was off. From my angle, the cross was upside down. A wave of nausea hit me, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't just an upside-down cross, it felt like a message. A warning. I couldn't explain it, but the sight of it filled me with a deep, unshakable dread. "Did you see that?" I asked my sister, my voice barely above a whisper. "See what?" she replied, looking confused. I pointed to the ceiling, but by the time she looked, the feeling had passed. The cross was still there, but the heavy atmosphere seemed to have lifted slightly. Still, I couldn't ignore the fear gnawing at me. I called my boyfriend immediately, desperate to hear his voice. I told him what I had seen and how it made me feel. He tried to calm me down, saying it was probably just my mind playing tricks on me. But I could tell he was worried too, even if he didn't want to admit it. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my own room. I stayed in my sister's room, hoping her presence would make me feel safer. But even there, the feeling of being watched never truly left me. I kept glancing at the doorway, half expecting to see someone, or something, standing there. The next morning, I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. I told my mom everything that had happened, from the screenshot in the basement to the upside-down cross. She listened carefully, her expression growing more serious with every word. "You know," she said after a long pause, "maybe we should get the house blessed. Just in case." I nodded, feeling a small flicker of relief at the idea. It was the first proactive step I could take to reclaim my sense of safety. Since then, I've started wearing my cross necklace every night. It's a small comfort, but it helps me feel a little more protected. Whatever is happening, whether it's real or just my imagination, I know I can't let it control me. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching. And I wonder if it ever really left.